my name is Rahela and welcome to my kitchen. Today what we're going to talk about is converting to a gluten-free diet. I, about 2.5 years ago, was diagnosed with celiac disease, and for me that was one of the biggest changes I've ever had to go through in my whole entire life. Up until this point, I'm a baker. Well, not by profession, it's a joy of mine. I love baking, and I kind of always found it a mission of mine just to kind of keep trying new things and learning new things. So for example, I learned how to make macarons, mainly from YouTube videos like these, and we just kind of stepped us through the processes. I've learned how to make bread. I make a lot of cakes, and I just love baking. So going gluten-free for me was a really big shock to the system, and to be honest, it was quite a difficult conversion for me to make. 2.5 years later, whilst it's still not easy, I find that there are some improvements, and it's a lot easier to deal with right now. So I just wanted to kind of go through maybe 10 steps just to kind of give you information about some of my journey and some of the things that I did, and in hope that it will help you make your conversion as well. So again, for me, it was by necessity. So I had to go really strict gluten-free. Now, I know we talk about gluten-free being everywhere at the moment. It's the new trend, and it's in a lot of places. What you need to distinguish between is the gluten-free for celiacs and gluten-free as a lifestyle choice. The lifestyle choice is a little bit simpler. I think a lot of people maybe don't really fully follow the gluten-free diet like what a celiac would have to. And the difference in that is that I believe that, like in a lot of people that go gluten-free because they want to avoid the flours, and because some think that it's healthier, for whatever reason, you're going gluten-free, but not because you have celiac. You probably aren't as vigilant in regards to cross-contamination. You're not as vigilant about all the products that are out there that have like really small, minute flours or thickeners or stuff that a celiac can't really have. So really this is more centered for the celiac, but again, it would work for somebody that's choosing to go gluten-free. One thing I will, however, say is that going gluten-free just by choice is not a healthier. It's not a healthier option. I found that to give flavour in products, they will put a lot more fat, a lot more sugar, because they want to enhance that flavour, because there's no gluten as such in some of the things that are totally delicious and I love. So it is a bit of a change. So for whatever reason, this is kind of what I think is important to concentrate on. So step one, don't panic, right? If you were just recently diagnosed, I know it can be overwhelming. It was really overwhelming for me as well. I really struggled with it. I was diagnosed just before Christmas. Worst time ever. I even said to my specialist, I'm not gonna go fully gluten-free until after Christmas, and I kind of took the opportunity to have the final meals that I kind of knew I wouldn't be able to have again. There is a lot of things you can't have. There's a lot of limitations going gluten-free, and it was just something that I kind of thought I wanted to have some of my favorite meals. I'm Serbian/Slovak/Hungarian, so a lot of our foods are centered around bread. A lot of it is around sweets, and a lot of it isn't stuff that you can replicate easily in a gluten-free diet. I have had a lot of success, don't get me wrong, and that's some of the stuff that I will be going through in some of my videos that I do in regards to baking, but there are obviously some that haven't gone as well. So panicking was just the natural thing for me, right? Like I thought, I can't have flour, I can't have flour, right? And what I've found with me particularly, I went through almost depression to some extent. I was just really upset, you know, like I have a wood fire oven, you know, I make my own bread, I've made pizzas, and I enjoy playing with dough, and it's just, it's amazing. So for those that actually know it and actually work on it and enjoy baking will know what I mean. And it is a bit of a difficult transition. And I did panic. My saving grace was that I had a great support system, and everybody around me was really patient and really understanding as well. Like I obviously had to make this change later on in life. Unlike like a lot of people with celiac, they're diagnosed earlier in life, and I was more of a late bloomer. And for me, it was more of a silent notification that I actually have celiac disease. For me personally, it was because I had basically no iron in my body, and they've decided to kind of investigate that and see why I wasn't having iron. And what actually ended up happening was that they sent me to all the specialists, and I had indicators of celiac disease, and I had the actual test, I had the biopsy, and that confirmed I had celiac disease. And since then, the journey has been that like every 6 months I go back to my specialist. In the beginning, in the first year, it was every quarter I would go get a blood test. Every 6 months was another biopsy, just to see how it was all progressing. At the moment, I've been changed to once a year review. So it's something that I will probably have to do for the rest of my life, because my specialist at least feels that we should keep monitoring this and making sure that the diet is working, and all of the things that I have to do. Sorry, that's an experiment, angel food cake, so we'll fix that in a second. We do the annual reviews for this particular reason. So panicking is a natural feeling to have. It's very overwhelming, especially once you start reading and looking into things. I find that it was really it was hard to get information, and a lot of people would give you a lot of different things and a lot of different information, and it's just a lot to learn. And I found that even shopping, something that used to be really simple, is now I had to fully change. I live with my younger brother, and we found that some things even he converted to gluten-free, just because for the simplicity of cooking and baking. Some things not. You know, there's been a lot of movement in the last 2 years, so it does get better. But while that's happening, you know, we just have to kind of keep going and sticking to this diet. So the good news is that the panicking feeling after, you know, a few months starts to die down. You start getting used to things, and you kind of start to come to terms with this change. And I found that for me at least, it was a lot simpler than I thought. I just found that I really struggled, because I was looking at the whole big picture of everything I had to do, everything I needed to learn, and that becomes really overwhelming. So don't panic. It will get easier, so we'll kind of go through that as well. Step 2 is to get familiar what you can and can't eat. So what's considered gluten is flour, so that's normal flour, wheat flour, spelt flour, barley, rye, oats. They're kind of your main ones. So oats is a bit of a, depending which country you live in, you may or may not be able to have oats. So in US, I found that a lot of people actually are allowed to have oats, but in Australia, I think the way it's grown, it's cross-contaminated, and you're not allowed to have oats. However, I've heard that in Australia you can do oat challenges, so they test you out what your reactions are to oats. So I haven't done this challenge yet. I'm going to ask my specialist when I see him in November whether that's something I can have a look at. If for no other reason that this is just something a little extra that you can kind of maybe incorporate in your baking and your food. So it's probably something I will look into. So when you look at what you can eat, a lot of the times it is overwhelming. When you think about it, wheat is in everything, right? A lot of the times, 2 years ago when I started gluten-free diet, for example, all the Smith's chips, they had like a powder flour in the flavorings, right? So I wasn't allowed to eat that. You will find, for example, even the Pringles, for example, right? They still have flour in there, so you still can't have Pringles, right? And that's just like, that's just more on the snack side. But likewise, for example, soy sauce. Soy sauce has wheat, so you actually can't eat it. However, there are some great substitutes. So, you need to kind of find those things that you can eat, whether they're marked as gluten-free, or whether they are gluten-free naturally, right? And there are some foods that are gluten-free naturally. For example, rice. Rice is gluten-free, just naturally gluten-free. If you're buying it in a pack pre-prepared, I will check still what's in there. But if you're buying a bag of rice, that's fine. One of the things that you need to constantly learn is how to read labels, and that's your step 3, right? That kind of helps you learn what you can and can't eat. So if you're buying pre-packaged stuff, anything that's processed, anything that's packaged by the company, you need to check the ingredients of it. Even as far as going for drinks as well, because there are some drinks that have gluten. For example, Nestle iced tea has gluten in it, or it did up until the last time that I checked. The important thing is that you need to keep checking, right? Because they do keep making a lot of movement and a lot of changes in the products that they sell in Australia, and they're changing some of their recipes to remove unnecessary gluten. For example, like I said, 2 years ago, Smith chips didn't have it. For example, also Kellogg's cornflakes. When you think about it, it's cornflakes, right? It's corn. And yet it's got barley malt in it, so you can't have cornflakes, you can't have cocoa pops, you can't have rice bubbles. Rice bubbles, when you think about it, it's rice, right? It's puffed rice. But yet they put barley malt in it, so you can't actually have it, and you're not allowed to eat it. So you have to look at it and just keep checking it, right? So I know that Kellogg's, for example, have come out with a gluten-free cornflakes. They've removed the barley malt from it, and it's delicious, right? So I buy it as a cereal sometimes. I remember what the old one is, and it's actually really good. So you can't really taste the difference, to be honest. So I think what a lot of companies are looking at the moment is actually that they're looking at widening their audience, and they don't actually have to do a lot to actually to widen that audience. They just have to start removing some of the restrictions from people. So if they remove some of the stuff that's considered as gluten, they open up a whole new area of customers without really doing too much of a change. Because a lot of the times what you'll find is that they don't really need to have it in there. For example, like a lot of the packets, like they have, for example, chili con carne packet that you, like seasoning mix that you're putting into chili con carne, right? It's a powdered seasoning and spices. Some packets have flour, but you can use corn flour. And if you, as soon as or maize flour or whatever, which are one of the gluten-free flours, the moment you do that, you open up your audience and who can actually buy your product. So a lot of companies are actually going through this. Knowing how to read labels, look, that is something that you need to learn how to do. There is a lot of help out there. I do highly recommend Coeliac Society. There's a lot of information in there, but there's also, like, they do a course every once in a while. It's not even that expensive, like $10-15, and they teach you how to read labels. I think when you look at the back of the label, it will tell you, right? It says contains gluten or may contain gluten, right? Technically, for a celiac, even the may contain gluten, you shouldn't be eating it. Although I do know some people that actually do eat it, just because their reactions aren't that big. There are different levels of celiac disease. There is the level where you get sick almost immediately from the smallest amount, from the smallest trace. It's almost like a allergic reaction, even though we know celiac isn't an allergy, but you know, it's actually a really quick reaction and a really severe reaction. I'm one of those that is on the lesser side. For me, it was always, you know, I had a stomach ache, or I had no iron in my body, so I became malnutrition. So I try and avoid just any gluten whatsoever, and I've been really good at it. I have sometimes had, for example, like the Cadbury chocolate, if it says may contain, even though they're getting better at this as well, even though you're not supposed to. So I need to kind of really point that out. You're not supposed to do this, right? You're supposed to avoid all sorts of gluten, and so it's, you know, even that will become easier to do. You just have to learn. Kind of read up on it. What a lot of the times it will actually say in brackets, it will say wheat. So it's like really playing out there what you can't have. The moment you see it, you can't have it. Barley, you can't have it. So the moment you see that it's got barley malt, generally they have it together, just put that product back. So there's something you kind of need to invest a bit of time in and just learn how to do. Step 4 is to learn about cross-contamination. This is a little bit more of a difficult one, and it's a really hard one to administer in your kitchen, especially if not everybody can have gluten-free. Not everybody, has to have gluten-free, right? So in my family, I'm the only one that's celiac. I'm pretty sure that one of my parents has to have it. One of my brothers got tested, the other one is going to get tested soon. So it is a genetic disease generally, and so I would have had to get it from one of my parents, but they feel like they're too old, that they don't want to actually get tested, which is their own thing. So cross-contamination in this kind of environment is quite hard to do, and it's something that you have to keep a really close eye on. So the way I've kind of implemented it in my family and in my house, not in my family, because I don't live with my parents. So some of the things I did do was I got a new toaster. So I found that gluten-free bread, especially 2 years ago, you had to toast it. It was just not that delicious. Eating, you couldn't really eat it straight from the packet, right? Which was kind of disappointing, but you know, what can you do? So you needed a new toaster. Now, the old toaster, it touches, like when you think about the toaster, right? Where you put the toast, it's always touched bread, right? And there's bread pieces stuck together, you know, so it was just easier get a new toaster, right? If you use Jaffle irons, you need to get yourself a Jaffle iron. You don't necessarily have to. I guess you could do a really good clean, but as those that do use Jaffle irons will know that it's kind of hard to really kind of get rid of every single speck of breadcrumbs, so it's just easier to do that. Things like a sandwich press, I didn't get a new sandwich press because that just didn't, you know, like you can clean that really easily. Likewise, I only have one mixer, one food processor, one bread maker. You just have to make sure that if you are going to use the same appliances with gluten and non-gluten, you have to make sure it's really well cleaned. Obviously all the gluten washes off, right? So you know, I didn't end up buying all these new pots and pans and everything else, but yeah, you just have to be really careful. Like for example as well, you know, what are they, cooling trays for cakes, cookies, right? If you put a cookie on, generally you don't wash it every single time. Like if it's just a cookie, you just do a quick wipe down, and you know, you don't necessarily have to wash it, but for this you have to, right? You just have to learn. You need to kind of clean everything really properly with if you're using gluten and non-gluten. In our house, I've kind of managed to convert majority of my baking to be gluten-free. Again, like I've had quite a lot of success, quite a lot of failures, so just get used to that, right? Because a lot of it is trial and error. So you just kind of have to see what works for you, but you don't feel like you have to go with the cross-contamination, that you have to replace everything or you have double of everything, because you don't, you know. So going further on the cross-contamination, things like what you have to be really careful of, and this is we're going to touch a little bit later in regards to going to restaurants and stuff. Some things, like for some people don't think about is things like, for example, using the oil to cook both gluten and non-gluten stuff. So what I tend to do, if I'm going to use the same oil, I tend to use the gluten-free stuff first, and then cook the gluten stuff, because then you don't have to change oils, right? However, if you're doing a bit of both, you cannot, under any circumstances, do gluten first and then go gluten-free and fry, let's say, schnitzel, right? You can't do that. That's cross-contamination fail right there. Likewise with pasta. Right? If I sometimes, on the rare occasions that I make pasta, if I cook my pasta first, so the gluten-free pasta first, that's fine, and then you cook the gluten pasta, again, perfectly fine. But the other way around, absolutely no, right? Because you've put gluten into the water and then you're going to cook gluten-free food, so that doesn't work, right? What we also had to do in our house is, for example, with jars, especially around like jams, for example, the stuff that we don't use a lot, right? For that, what we tend to do is, that's in our family gluten-free, right? So if my brother, who lives with me, because he's not celiac, if he wants to use that, he'll take a spoon, take it out, make sure that doesn't touch the bread, and then I know that there's no cross-contamination in there whatsoever. So you can't go, you know, take a knife into the jam and spread it on gluten bread and then, you know, take more. That's cross-contaminated. That is no longer considered gluten-free, even though ingredients, for example, might be gluten-free, but because you've cross-contaminated it, it's not, right? The one thing that we do is, for example, margarines and certain spreads, right, that we tend to use a lot of, then we'll have, you know, we'll put names on it. So even in the fridge, if you look at my fridge, you'll see my name on certain things. Generally, I just put my name on it, and then we know that it's contaminated either which way. And on the rare occasions, like for example, Nutella, it's like a big thing in our house, you will get a jar that says my brother's name as well. So, you know, we'll have that, so we know we're not allowed to touch each other's. So then, more for me, I don't cross-contaminate any of the food that I'm making, because I do a lot of recipes with Nutella as well. So what I'll tend to do is use it from my jar, because if it's something that I'll be able to have as well, so we don't have cross-contamination. They're kind of your main things. I mean, you just have to be a little bit more vigilant in regards to what's considered cross-contamination, and if anything has touched flour, you know, you can't, make sure you don't do gluten-free stuff afterwards. Even for example, when I make schnitzels, I will generally do my stuff first. So, you know, I'll use a bowl for the gluten-free flour, eggs, and then the gluten-free breadcrumbs. Once I'm done with that, I replace the gluten-free breadcrumbs and the gluten-free flour. Gluten-free flour, neither here nor there, so sometimes I just leave it, I just use it all up. But I will then do the gluten stuff, just because it needs to always be first. I've done it once before as well, tiramisu. You need to remember to do the gluten-free first. If you're doing a small section that's gluten-free, you will then need to do that first, because you're touching things with your hands, and you know, you're cross-contaminating it everywhere. That was an expensive lesson. So, well, not really an expensive lesson. I just couldn't have any, right? there's two train of thoughts, right? So I could just make it, because some of the stuff that they've got gluten-free is actually not as bad. It's actually quite good. And you don't notice the difference, right? The problem is it's really expensive, right? So if I was to make a tiramisu just with gluten-free sponge fingers, it will easily double or triple my cost, right? I think like for, I think it was a 10 pack, I think potentially, it was like $8-9, right? And I used like 500 gram sponge fingers. So it would end up being, because I make a large batch, right? It would end up being quite a lot of money. So you tend to, if you can, it's a lot more work, but I tend to kind of make two of that. So make myself a little one, and then for everybody else, they'll just have the normal one because they can eat it, right? So you don't have to make everything gluten-free. It just depends how much you want to complicate your life. Apparently I like to complicate my life quite a lot. So that's main stuff I think I had on cross-contamination. Just make sure you wash your hands if you touch wheat. A lot of the times what we'll find, if we're doing two things at the same time, we'll split the bench top. We'll have like an island, and so we'll make sure that gluten stuff is on one end and gluten-free stuff is on the other end, so just nothing in between, so it just doesn't touch it. So that's kind of what we tend to do. Step 5 is you need to reorganize your pantry and your fridge, right? So let's go back. You're starting out. This is brand new. A lot of the stuff you don't know. What is gluten-free, what's not. You need to make a decision, right? Are you going to throw it out? Are you going to, is the rest of your family still going to eat it? If that is the case, I would recommend the pantry, like maybe put yourself like a shelf that's just gluten-free, and so easier what you can and can't do, or something that you can, especially in the beginning, just to help to ease your struggles. Maybe get like a from Office Works or one of the stationery things, like a red dot or something, and you put a red dot on every gluten-free jar that you've got in your pantry or in your fridge, so it just kind of helps you easily identify. You're not going to have to do it all the time. Once you actually know what products are gluten-free and what products are gluten, your life will become easier. Like, I don't tend to check as much anymore because I just know. But having said that, I've managed to convert probably 90% of my pantry and my fridge and freezer into gluten-free stuff, just because I could, and there have been products that have been quite good. So for example, I made some of the cake stuff that I do, because like, as I mentioned, I do love baking, and I have converted it to gluten-free with some of the success. Like there's a sponge that's really good. You can't tell a difference. For my parents' 40th anniversary, I made it gluten-free, fully gluten-free. The whole meal, the only thing on the table that was gluten was the schnitzel. Everything else was gluten-free, and even with the cakes, I made 2 cakes, a banana custard one and a rum, chocolate rum and sponge one. People didn't know that like, they're seriously thrown that was gluten-free. You can actually make really delicious food. So don't be scared to experiment. I think it can be a little bit scary of actually, like, especially when you're starting out. So just make sure that you keep trying. You'll get failures, but just keep trying anyway. I might later on kind of do another video, just if people are interested, about just some of the how you can convert your normal recipes to gluten-free. So it's important to check your kitchen and to rearrange it however it's going to suit you, whether it's a whole shelf that's going to be only gluten-free stuff. We've got a large pantry, a lot of it's baking stuff in my house, so for me it was generally like, I just had converted everything, and I put stickers on stuff that's gluten, for example, because majority of my stuff was actually gluten-free. And I just knew, Cocoa Pops, I can't have Cocoa Pops, right? So if we have cereal Cocoa Pops in there, I just knew I wasn't allowed to have it. So it kind of helps with that particular scenario. So yeah, that was reorganizing your pantry. Now, one of the things is step 6, really go food shopping, right? Once you kind of know what you can and can't eat, once you learn how to read labels, once you reorganize your pantry and your fridge, you need to go food shopping, right? And the first time you go, first time, when I went the first time, right, it took me so long to get through shopping, really did, because everything I had to pick up and look at the label and stuff. And even with that, like, I needed to obviously then find substitutes for all my products. Now I will do another video for the products that I actually do use. Just because it all came as trial and error, and I think, you know, if I can help you, I can help you. But again, you just have to think it's all about tastes. It's personal preference. So what will work for somebody else might not work for you. So you need to, unfortunately, trial and error. So, you know, just make sure before you go shopping, put down what you want to replace. So what you find new things for. For example, you want to find a new bread that you like. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to buy probably a few different ones and just keep trying it. Whether you try a different one each week, or what I did in the beginning, I maybe did 2 or 3 same ones and just kind of compared it like that. So, you know, you need to buy new bread, some sort of crackers that you can have. Again, there's some really good ones out there at the moment, you know, and just products in general, right? So for example, I needed to buy new soy sauce, I needed to buy new mayonnaise. Now you're lucky at the moment, there's a lot of gluten-free mayonnaises, because there's something in the last few years they did a lot of changes in the product. When I started, there was one and it wasn't that delicious, and that was just 2.5 years ago. So it's amazing the progress that there has been. So put your list, see what you need to do, and then just understand, make sure you've got a lot of time the first time you go shopping, just because you're going to be looking at every single label that's out there, every product that you're trying to buy, and you'll be trying to find new products that you can use instead of the gluten ones, because you don't want to. You can if you really can be bothered, but you want to try and limit how much doubling up of cooking you're doing. So if it's a slightly different flavor but it's gluten free, I'd use that, right? So for example, tomato paste, right? Some have gluten, some don't, you know, so just make sure you go for the one that doesn't have gluten, so you don't have to worry about that, and you can just cook one dish. So yeah, it's going to take you a long time. It's going to take you a little while to get used to, but that's okay. It does get easier. Important thing is, every once in a while, you have to check the products again, because they do change them, right? Now, generally, the movement these days is to remove the gluten from the product. However, I have noticed cases where they've changed the recipe and they don't tell you that they've changed the recipe, and it might have something you can't have. So you have to keep checking it, unfortunately. It's not something that you can look at once and you know, yeah, forever you can have that. So that's not the case. So you have to do that. Step 7, take small steps with food and baking. So this is going to be trial and error from start to finish, right? And it's always a trial and error, right? So with gluten-free baking, for example, is like the flours. You can't have the normal wheat flour, right? And gluten-free flour generally has a combination of a whole bunch of flours. So some of the ones that I have in my pantry are sorghum flour, potato flour, rice flour, brown rice flour, I'm forgetting some tapioca flour, corn flour. I feel like I'm forgetting 2 because I thought I had 9. And then I do have just mixtures like, you know, an Aldi mix or from Woolworths, just their brand of just plain flour, right? Which has combination of other flours. Until you kind of get used to what you like, that will take a little while to kind of figure out. For example, I know I do not like buckwheat flour and I do not like maize flour. They're my least preference flours, so I tend to not add them to my cooking. I don't have them in my house, and I tend to look for gluten-free stuff that doesn't have a large amount of these flours in there. So if you're looking at a packet and it says first maize flour, I know that that's going to be a really strong maize flour taste, and I won't get that just because that's my personal preference. But other people tasted it and they liked it. So you just again, it's preference. So you just need to take it one step at a time. You will buy so many products. And I've, you open the product, you taste it, and it's like you really don't like this. So you kind of tend to throw it away. Unless you can actually eat it, you tend to just know you don't like it. So that's, I don't tend to eat it then. And likewise with baking, converting a lot of my recipes, there was a trial and error. There was a lot of failed attempts. A lot. I could tell so many. I can do like another 3 videos of my failed attempts at certain things, but you learn, right? So each time you try something different, it's just like normal baking. If it doesn't fire, my goodness, let's try that again. If it doesn't succeed, you can just try something different, add a different flour, adjust your liquid, adjust your eggs. So yeah, you just need to be prepared that you will fail, and unfortunately that's the case. But if you do succeed, make sure you write that down, because 2 months down the track, you're not going to remember what you did and how much of everything you put in there, but you're going to miss that particular food, how you've actually made it. So just take it easy, small steps, and you will get a lot more confident, and it does get really easier. Step 8 is more to consider joining Coeliac Australia. It's a society here. Like if you are diagnosed with celiac, I do highly recommend them. They send you like a quarterly magazine. I think there is an annual fee, but that's just kind of to help them. I think it's like, I want to say $50-$60. I can't remember 100%. And it's really just to cover their publications and what they send you. Like you do get a starter pack, so they kind of give you a pack of what you can and can't eat, so they'll just send you some products. But the beauty of it is that you get a lot of information on their website. You know that they are accredited. You know that they are going to give you the right information. So if you're going to listen to anybody, you would listen to them. Like I said, the downside is that there is a yearly membership. I don't tend to mind, because like just purely by the magazine that you get, you get a lot of information out of that. And so you get like a newsletter and a magazine, and in a magazine they even give you recipes and just ideas, so it does help. The other thing is there's also a yearly gluten-free expo. Now I cannot recommend this more for you to go to the gluten-free expo. Whichever city you're in Australia, they will have one. I think for the Melbourne, should have checked the date, but I think it's sometime in October this year. And I went last year. I went straight away the first year, right? And what I found was really good, and I wish that it didn't take like 10 months of me being on gluten-free for the next one to come around, because it would have helped me so much, right? Is the beauty of it is they have so many samplers, and almost every booth actually will give you to try their product, which is amazing, right? So instead of you buying and spending money on trying a product, you just go to this thing and you just try it, and if you like it, you buy it. Generally they have like good sales on, and if you don't, well, you don't, right? You just don't buy their product. And when you go to Woolworths or Coles or IGA or wherever you shop, or Aldi, you just know not to buy their product because you didn't really like the taste of it. And they also have like a beautiful like a food truck type of thing. So if you really miss pasta, or you really miss pizza, or last year they had donuts, you can kind of try it there. So it's really good. I recommend it. So step 9 is get comfortable with going out to restaurants. Now I have to admit, this is still very difficult, right? Because you're putting your faith in the cross-contamination and making sure it's gluten-free in somebody else's hands. As I said kind of in the beginning of the video, there's that whole movement of people choosing to go gluten-free, which is fine if that's what you choose to do. However, what I found that a lot of restaurants kind of get confused between nut gluten-free and the gluten-free celiac needs. And I wish that there was a different term for celiac, just to know how strict it needs to be. I've been to many restaurants, and you have to get comfortable with asking questions, right? Because I've gone to many restaurants and it says on the menu it's gluten-free, right? And then when I ask them, your pasta, is it boiled in the same water, or is it boiled in the in a different water or separate water? And they tell you it's boiled in the same water that the normal pasta's boiled in. That's not gluten-free. They just look at, well, the pasta says gluten-free, right? That's not the case, so we can't have that. And likewise, it's really important, like a lot of restaurants will say, for example, chips, like, you know, fries, they're gluten-free, but you have to ask them, does it have its own oil? If it doesn't, then it's not gluten-free. So there are some restaurants that do better and some then don't. In Coeliac Australia, there have been some that are accredited gluten-free, which means that they're really careful. There's also some amazing takeaway shops as well. I know there's one because I live in Melbourne, there's one fish and chip shop in Hallam that has everything flagged as gluten-free. They have their own fryer, they have their own bench space. Everything's really, because their son is celiac as well, and you know that they're going to be careful with your food. So, and I've never had any issues with them. So you have to kind of get more and more comfortable. But it's unfortunate because you are going to struggle. That's one thing that you are going to struggle with when you go to events. A lot of the times I haven't had anything that I can have and that I can eat. So unfortunately, you just have to. It's something you just have to deal with, right? There's nothing much about it, but you need to ask the questions, because if you don't ask the questions, you could get cross-contaminated, and you might eat something that you're not allowed to eat. So just make sure you do the right thing. And step 10 is really make sure your friends and family support you. I've had a great support system. I want to say almost sometimes my younger brother who lives with me is better than I am at checking things, because like so many times I've drunk something and he'll be like, did you check that label? Like, are you allowed to have that? And I'm like, well. So it takes a little while to get used to, and even after 2.5 years, I still sometimes forget, unfortunately. But the important thing is that your friends and family do understand how strict this is for you. You have to sit them down and explain to them. I've had many people tell me, oh, well, surely a small amount won't be a problem for you. And it's just not, you just can't, right? And it's sometimes it's just easier not to even argue the point. Just don't eat it, right? Because I know sometimes some of the older people, just the older generations, they might not understand just how severe this disease is. I don't actually like it being called disease, because it seems like something's quite horribly wrong with us. It's just that our body can't handle certain foods. So make sure your friends understand. I've had even my cousin's wife, and like whenever we go over for dinner with them, they're really super careful. They know, they understand what I have to do, especially those people that you spend a lot of time with. Make sure you sit down with them and explain and kind of walk them through what cross-contamination means, what you can and can't use, and just what are some of the tips that would help you if they have to cook for you, for example, and what you can and can't do. So if you have that great support, you'll find that even though like I felt really guilty in the beginning, I found that they were more than willing to kind of go the extra step just so I could be with them as well. It wasn't a struggle for them, so they're really good in that particular case. And my family's been really good. I mean, even for my parents, you know, it was quite a big change for them, you know, to actually try and do this. And even sometimes they'll even say, oh, you know, just go and get this bread or whatever, and they're like, oh wait, you can't have bread. So, you know, it's the whole changing of the lifestyle, and it does take time. So I think that's kind of my 10 steps and some of the journey that I went through. And there's so much more to be said. I really seriously, I could do so much more information. I think I've kind of gone way too long as it is. But, you know, if something does interest you, just put it in the comments below and, you know, I can kind of either answer, I can do another video if you're interested. And please subscribe, like this video if you kind of like this kind of thing. As I said, kind of like my aim for this channel will be just to kind of go through my journey, my experiences with food especially, you know, and what you can and can't do, removing some of the myths that, you know, gluten-free food has to be bland, it's not that delicious, and trust me, like if you just go and buy stuff from the shops, it's very often that can be the case, but it doesn't have to be. There are so many options that you could do, so it's kind of what my aim is. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it helpful, and do let me know if you want to, if you'd like any further information on a particular topic. Talk to you later. Till next time.